So today what we're going to be taking a look at is a few games running on the SER5 Max and the SER6 Max. We're going to be seeing what the performance difference is between these two chips in these two mini PCs by the exact same company. Now, even though both are numbered differently and you'd think that there is a yearly difference between them, they both actually ended up coming out pretty much in the exact same year, just with different generation of chips. So let's see what the difference between the 5800H on the SER5 Max is like with the 7735HS on the SER6 Max. So first up on the comparison here, we have Tiny Tina's Wonderland running at the lowest in-game graphic settings, but we aren't using any upscaling like FSR or anything like that. The game does support it, but we really didn't need it here, at least to get a good performance level on the 7735HS. So the SER6 Max is getting some fantastic levels of performance with the lowest in-game graphic settings, but at the full 1080p resolution. The SER5 Max, while not exactly giving us the same level of performance, is still giving some decent levels of performance for a newer title like this, and overall I'm happy with the result on either one. But you can definitely see that the SER5 Max is falling behind just due to the fact that it is still on Vega, while RDNA 2 really had a major improvement in performance. Now the next game that I took a look at was Red Dead Redemption 2. This was running at the lowest in-game graphic settings, but we do set the textures to Ultra and we are using FSR at the performance preset. And here you're seeing what is essentially a generational difference, almost like when we went from the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5, where games that were closer to a 30 FPS average were now getting far closer to a 60 FPS average. This is a pretty major jump in performance and overall is going to lead to you having a vastly different experience while playing the game. And it really demonstrates the performance difference between Vega and RDNA 2. Next up is Batman Arkham Knight running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and here you can see between the two systems there isn't a drastic jump in performance, but still a pretty noticeable one. And it's going to lead to the SER6 Max actually having a consistent 60 FPS average, with only the occasional dip below that, while the SER5 Max is, while still going to be giving you an above 30 FPS average all around, it's never really going to hit that 60 FPS, and unfortunately it doesn't even go all the way up to 45, but still overall playable experiences on both of them. Next up is Mount & Blade Bannerlord running at the medium in-game graphics settings. The reason I went with medium is really because of the fact that at the lowest in-game graphics settings, the game does not look that different from the original Mount & Blade. And it's at medium where you finally start to get some of the foliage and the shadows and just more of the detail back, without absolutely murdering your performance. And luckily on the SER6 Max it can actually handle this perfectly fine, and we're going to get to a not quite 60 FPS average but very close to it, and our 1% lows are going to look very nice there. While on the SER5 Max, we're really going to have to start thinking about dropping things down even more, especially because those 1% lows are proving to be a problem. They're dropping noticeably below 30. And of course, our FPS average isn't exactly getting anywhere near a 60 FPS average, barely struggling to even get above 30. Now, Bioshock Infinite is a title that's been in the rotation for benchmarks on my channel for quite a while now, but I usually end up doing the very high graphics preset. I don't tend to do the ultra graphics, and that mostly comes down to the fact that ultra graphics on this game can be pretty demanding. But I decided to do ultra this time because I really wanted to see what would happen if we tried to push these APUs on older titles at their most extreme settings. And here both provide a more than playable enough experience, though neither is actually providing a above 60 FPS average, which is interesting considering the age of the title. But as I said, at its very max graphics settings, it can be a very demanding game. And in general, we're still seeing a pretty noticeable lead on the 7735HS that is going to lead to a overall far better gaming experience. Now, in the most recent title that I've taken a look at, here we have Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is the newest title to join the roster of benchmarked games, this is one of the clearest examples of the huge generational difference between Vega iGPUs and RDNA 2 based iGPUs, where we're seeing pretty much doubling of performance in both the 1% lows and the averages, leading to what is not even a consistent 30 FPS average, failing to even clear that type of experience over to a practically 60 FPS average. This is pretty meaningful because that means that the game actually becomes not only playable, but an extremely enjoyable experience, and all within a relatively same sized computer, the only difference being pretty much one generation of iGPUs. In Mafia 2, the definitive edition, the level of performance that we actually got on both systems was decent enough, but actually kind of disappointing, mostly due to the fact that the 1% lows really did not improve with the SER6 Max. There was a noticeable jump in the FPS average, but not in those 1% lows. And this was consistent across multiple runs, so it was just an overall shame to see that it doesn't really seem to run that well, at least in terms of being completely smooth. As you'll see with the frame time charts in both of them, there seems to be consistent spikes that happen in certain areas. So while there is a difference in performance between the two of them, it's not exactly a great title for either one. Now next up is another title that has been frequently in the benchmark rotation, but normally with the very high graphics settings. This time around we're going with the ultra graphics settings. And you can see that both of us give us some pretty fantastic levels of performance on this title, though the SER6 Max is the only one that can give us a consistent above 60 FPS for our 1% lows. Still, if you're trying to play this game on either one of these systems, I don't think you're really going to have much of any problems. And it does show that in a lot of older titles, either system is going to do a great job. And I think it is important to emphasize that you do have access to a very large library of games to play. You don't necessarily need to be playing the most recent titles. So if you're on a lower end system, there's still a lot you can do. But the next game that I took a look at was Deus Ex Mankind Divided, running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. One of the most demanding in-game benchmarks that I have seen so far at any game running at 1080p with its lowest in-game graphics settings. Pretty much all Vega iGPUs struggle to do much of anything on here, while this RDNA chip here is able to give us some fantastic levels of performance and just barely missing that 60 FPS average, but still leading to an overall far better gaming experience. And what we tend to see is a lot of the time we're very close to just having a doubling of the performance, going from the SER5 Max to the SER6 Max. And last but not least, I wanted to try out a lighter title that kind of represents what the esports gamers are like, and that is Rainbow Six Siege here, running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we are using FSR at the ultra quality preset. And what that ends up doing for us is we see a pretty significant jump in performance as well. Now, neither one is going to be a bad experience at all, but if you're trying to get a high refresh rate gaming experience, the SER6 Max just does a far better job at that. And if you're willing to mess around with FSR quality settings, you do have a higher ceiling that you can get to in terms of performance. So what did we learn from all that? Well, the SER6 Max in the best case scenario seems to be around double the performance of the SER5 Max in terms of gaming. Now, it's very important to have that distinction that it's in terms of gaming here, because of the fact that in terms of CPU performance, these two chips are practically identical. We're talking about in the percentages of difference, single digit percentages rather. While the GPU performance here, we're talking about pretty much, even in the worst case scenarios, we were still looking at about a 20% jump in performance. So anywhere between a 20% increase to just a straight up doubling of the overall performance. If gaming really matters to you, CPU, the SER6 Max is pretty much a worthwhile upgrade because you're not really paying double the cost. You're looking at about $100 to $150 upgrade. But if gaming does not matter to you at all, the SER5 Max is pretty much the way to go because you get the exact same CPU performance and you can get more RAM and more storage for cheaper on it. Pretty much for the cost of the SER6 Max, you can get a maxed out SER5 Max, and now you've maximized your max. And you've also maximized your savings. But anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one.